which teachers will have to pay for.
I call Catherine Delahunty.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I'm delighted to take a call on this important piece of legislation and like to reiterate what my colleague Chris Hipkins has said about the submitters. I think for those of us who attended the hearings, there was an amazing consistency in the submissions from the many voices of people, and we really heard very clear messages about what's important. Hence, the Green Party is opposing the bill, and we're putting up 10 supplementary audit papers on different aspects of the bill in an effort to make sure that the bill could actually reflect what the profession wants out of their council. And if we go back to how change is best achieved, it's interesting to think, is change best achieved by imposition or inspiration? And nobody disagrees that the Teachers' Council could go through a review process. It's a necessary part of any institution that it be reviewed, and that it be reviewed by government who put money in, and by the profession who should own it in the professional sense. And clearly the profession are not happy with what is being suggested for this organisation. So we had an overwhelming number of submissions that clearly stated that the profession did not want the Teachers' Council to be turned from a registration body run by professionals, where at least some of the people were appointed by those professionals, to turn into a creature of the Minister of the Day. And this is basically what has happened. It has become a creature of the Minister of the Day. Hence the large numbers of submissions that focused on the issue of representation. And although we did have a victory on one issue, which is to get teachers onto the council, I'd like to first address the issue of representation, which is in one of my SOPs, because one of the problems that we have with representation is that it is not teachers being able to choose their own people. The field is now open to anyone to vote, and that every single of the 9 appointments will have to be accepted by the Minister. Now, that is not the situation at the moment. At the moment, though the Minister appoints some of the people, we actually have a large number of teachers engaged in voting for the representatives. They've just been through that process, and we've seen the result, which is some very high calibre people being voted on by the profession. We, Mr Chair, don't see why, and hence the SOP we've put up, there is such a lack of trust in the ability of teachers to govern themselves. So we support, as do the teachers who came and submitted, and it was largely teachers' organisations that did, that came and submitted, that they actually would like to see an improvement to registration. There was no disputing the improvement to registration, the importance of having tight and heavily monitored guidelines for making sure who gets to work with our children, because this is what this Teachers' Council has been about. It's been about who gets to work with our kids, and when there's been problems, then it's been really important that we look at the loopholes in the structures and make sure that we cannot have loopholes, and that the vulnerable will not be, the children will not be exposed to people who shouldn't be there. So that's one of the SOPs we want to raise, is the critical issue of representation, and we really do believe that if we want change, it should be inspired, not imposed, and that the teachers themselves should have control of their own professional body. We've already heard that from a number of us in the first levels of debate, but we heard it thousands of times, literally thousands of times at the Select Committee. Day after day after day in different cities, we heard people say, please, we want to represent ourselves, we are professionals. Which leads me on to another of my SOPs, which relates to the question of ethics versus conduct. And again, the professionals were saying, if you really want to lift the status of the profession, which you claim to do in this bill, why don't you respect the fact that the Code of Ethics is a fundamental recognition of that? Why are you going for a code of conduct which is far more about a tick box public service control model than recognising our professionalism? And it should be remembered that the fees that the teachers pay is for their own professional body. Therefore, they should have the type of code that reflects their responsibilities and their beliefs and their capacity as professionals. The medical profession do, as was pointed out to us numerous times, as do other bodies. So why not the teachers? If we are really serious about valuing teachers and making sure that we have the best possible education system in this country, this was the moment to listen to those submitters. But unfortunately, the bill has not listened, has not been changed sufficiently to do that. So that's very disappointing. And a code of ethics would have been a signal from the government that we recognise that the teaching profession is more than capable of distinguishing the difference between conduct and ethics, and that ethics requires a broader, deeper and more educational approach. Mr. Chair.
Catherine Delahunty.
Thank you very much. Continuing to some of the other SOPs, Mr. Chair, the functions of the Educational Council, these are really important issues because, again, the status of the profession is at stake in this. And the idea that the broad powers of this new council is interesting, but it's very vague. So it doesn't really address the issue that the council was set up for. It's changing its function profoundly without the support of the profession. So if it's going to raise the status of the profession, the way this is structured relies far more on the actions of the minister and the ministry. It doesn't actually raise the status of the profession at all. So the purpose statement of the new body is really vague and it's not clear because status of teaching relies much more on matters such as employment and conditions and remuneration than something that the council itself can control. So we don't really need a ministerial body duplicating the efforts of other bodies that we already have for raising the status of the profession and for the functions that are suggested. So it will not lead to safe, high-quality leadership and teaching unless it has buy-in from those people, unless it's the core business. So the debate remains, what is the core business of this council? And I don't think that was clarified at all. We did not hear why these statements about the function and raising status, etc., what they mean and how that's core business. And teachers were very concerned that they were going to pay fees for something that was vague and it could rely on certain things happening with that money that didn't raise the status of the profession, that was just the fashion of the day or an opportunity to spend money which they had paid for to do things that they didn't have actually any power over. For example, if the council decided to run expensive advertising campaigns or give out awards or invite new standards or criteria which no one had proper input into. And these costs could then be sheeted home to the teachers who have not got those powers, who don't want to change the functions in the way that they've been suggested. So we're actually going to say if you're going to put a cost on teachers, we ought to listen to what it is that they want done. So that's another of our SRPs. There's several of them relating to the functions of the Educans Council because it's critical that the functions are not only clear but they are supported by the people who have to carry them out. We're also very concerned about the clauses in the bill around changing the name because of the symbolic importance of the word teacher, and we understand why so many submitters raised this. It may seem like a petty and minor point to some people, but actually it's quite critical if you recognise that teacher is a profession we want to uplift in this country, and therefore a teachers' council will understand exactly what a teachers' council does. Educans, that could be any NGO, could be any consultancy, it could be any private body. It's one of those meaningless names that does not actually inspire the confidence of the people it's supposed to represent. So it's a very concerning issue, and it's a symbolic issue rather than a profound content issue, but people were afraid that it would flow into content. The clauses around limited authority to teach, we want to change those, and we have a supplementary order paper about skill shortage. We have no problem with limited authority to teach so long as it's related to skills shortages. But actually what we heard around the country from the submitters that there aren't these skill shortages. So why are the limited authority to teach clauses being expanded in this? Is it something to do with charter schools? Is it the fact that they want to make sure that there are more unqualified people in front of groups of children who've been identified by the government as priority learners? We don't know. But when we asked, many of us from the opposition at the Select Committee, when we asked, do you have skill shortages? The schools said no. That's not the issue, but not in that way. We do not need an extension to limited authority to teach. So that was another one that we would like to change the law to make it clear that we support limited authority to teach where there are skill shortages, but not as a blanket increase in the number of people who are coming into schools without having the pedagogical background to understand the difference between knowing a subject and teaching a subject. And that is a profound difference. And it's a difference that particularly for primary, but it applies to secondary as well. When you're teaching a person as opposed to a subject, you have to understand the dynamics and the pedagogy, not just be really good at understanding how to do some particular thing or to have even a knowledge of quantum physics. That's not how it works if you want people to learn. So we're disappointed in those clauses and we're suggesting those. In the later stages, my colleague and myself will talk about the clauses around the tertiary governance. Very, very concerning.
Chair.
The Honourable Heke Parata.
Tēnā